All right. Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you for attending this year's virtual Roads and Streets Conference in the crazy year of 2020. I'm going to go ahead and introduce our speakers for this session. So you've got a project, now you want me to pay for it. Okay, Julian Dressing is the city engineer at the city of Tempe, where his team delivers over $250 million in capital improvement projects each year. Previously, he spent nearly 14 years in Tempe's transportation division. He has a bachelor's degree in civil engineering from the U of A and a master's degree in civil engineering from ASU. He was recently recognized as the City of Tempe's Bike Hero for his contributions to improving safety for Tempe's multimodal transportation users. Our second speaker is Shelley Seiler. She graduated from the University of Portland with a Bachelor of Science in Civil Engineering and is registered as a professional engineer and professional traffic operations engineer. Upon graduation, she worked as a structural engineer for Miller Consulting Engineers and then the City of Portland in the Portland Bureau of Transportation before relocating to Arizona. In 2001, Shelley began working for the City of Tempe in the Transportation Division as a senior civil engineer. Since that time, she has worked on a variety of projects, including the Valley's Light Rail Transit Project, the Tempe Streetcar Project, various streetscape projects, and the Orbit Neighborhood Circulator Program. Currently, she is the Deputy Engineering and Transportation Director for the Transportation Division. Shelley is a member of the Institute of Transportation Engineers. Let me welcome our speakers.
Well, thank you so much for that introduction, Sky. Is my audio okay?
Seems like it to me.
Okay. Yep. I got a little note that my internet might be a little bit funky. So Shelley, you might have to take over.
Mine actually just told me that too. So here we go.
So thank you everybody for attending today's session. Sky, thank you so much for that introduction. Again, my name is Julian Driesing. I'm the city engineer for the city of Tempe. And Sky reached out to me at one point and said, you know, we're looking for presentations on financing projects and there's not a lot of interest. And I try to think what's some information that I wish I knew a long time ago that I had to learn the hard way over the last few years. And so that's really the crux of what Shelley and I are going to try to share with you today. So here's a quick slide. This is Shelley and I when we were just young baby engineers. We were young and cute and naive, and we really had no idea of like how projects were actually funded. So we heard terms like geo bonds and secondary property tax. I had a house, but I paid that, but didn't know what it meant. All these acronyms like CMAQ and HSIP and HERF and VLT. I knew they were important, but I didn't know how they related to the projects that we were taking on. And also I didn't know personally how I paid for a lot of these projects. So that's something that we're going to try to share with you today. Now we're seasoned engineers. We're no longer baby engineers. We're older, still cute, I'd like to say, wiser. And we're going to share with you in 20 minutes what it's taken us 20 years to kind of understand. And when I say kind of, I'm still learning. Shelley's still learning. I sent this presentation to our budget guy and I thought I had it 100% down and he made some modifications. So if you have questions later on, we'll do the best we can, but this kind of gives us a little bit of an out, I'm hoping. So Shelley is going to do the next few slides and then I'll come back later in the presentation. So Shelley, take it away.
Julian talked a little bit about the different funding sources we have and the variety of acronyms that are used in the industry. So it's easy to come up with all these transportation projects, right? We know the city has a variety of needs, and this list just probably touches the surface of what we, the projects we have on our CIP lists and the performance measures that our city council has identified that we're working towards. So like I said, it's easy to come up with the projects, but when it comes to funding, it's not so easy. And so we're going to go through those with you. Julian, if you can advance to the next slide. So how do we pay for all of them? Next slide, please. So there's 5 main funding sources, and we're going to go through each of them with you. The first one that we look at is, so I'm going to ask everyone a few questions. Do you own a house in Tempe or really anywhere in the region? And if you answer yes to that, then you are probably paying secondary property taxes. So who pays those? Well, as a property owner, you do, and it's based on the tax rate for each jurisdiction. So you all probably got recently in the mail from the Maricopa, if you live in Maricopa County, you probably got your tax assessment paperwork, and the cities, schools, and counties each assess a different amount, and that's based off of your property's assessed value. And that goes towards paying for our projects. Now, there's some limitations. We use that for large capital projects, design, construction, and some procurements. And in order to fund the large capital projects, which are in our CIP, the city borrows money through the sale of voter authorized GO bonds. And so by state statute, those secondary property taxes can only be used to make payments on bond debt. And part of the reason why we would only want to use that money to pay for large projects is you don't want to really be bonding for small projects. It really just does not make sense financially. All right, next slide, please. Similarly, if you own a house, the city of Tempe and many other cities in the region have put in place development impact fees. And what are development impact fees? Well, there are fees that are paid for by developers. Unfortunately, they probably pass those costs on to the users like home buyers and lessees. And the basis for it is that development should pay for its fair share of the growth. So when a development happens, whether it's a housing project or a commercial business, they're assessed a certain amount of development impact fees. And then we as a city identify projects in what's called an IIP. So what's an IIP? It's an infrastructure and improvement plan. And it's a document that identifies growth-driven infrastructure needs with a given planning period, and that's typically 10 years. So if you were to go in and look at the City of Tempe's, which it's published on our website, you would see that Julian and I, over the last few years, have identified several projects. Again, they're capacity projects, so they are there to basically help address any issues that we might face as developments are put in place. And so there'd be intersection improvement projects. We have bus pullouts. We actually even have some pedestrian grade separation projects. We have a roundabout in there. So those are examples of some of the projects that we have placed in our IIP, and each city might be a little different, but in identifying their needs. Next slide. All right, do you own a car? So most of us probably do, unless you're a zero car household, which if you are, that is awesome. If you own a car, you probably are paying a vehicle license tax. It's a VLT as the owner. And if you go and check your registration, you probably see a VLT fee on there. And the formula, if you're interested in learning more about that, you can go to azvltcalculator.com, and that will show you exactly how that amount is identified. So it's intended for transportation, and it's via the and goes into our general fund that then can help pay for some of the projects that we have. Now, it's a fee that we, again, put into our general fund. But in addition, if you own a car, next slide, Julian, you're probably also paying state gas taxes. And those state gas taxes, again, are paid by anyone who buys gas. So unless you own a completely electric vehicle, you are paying about 18 cents a gallon. Those fees were established or long ago, but the most recent increase was in 1991. Unfortunately, most cities are faced with using other revenue sources to pay for projects because this money does not go a long way in supporting construction. It is limited to transportation and construction and maintenance. It goes into our HERF fund, so it's gas taxes that are collected and deposited into HERF. It's the primary source of revenue for many cities and towns to pay for construction, operations, and maintenance. However, like I said, in Tempe, it doesn't really go very far. And so it mainly supports our operations, and we are able to infuse our CIP projects with a little bit of HERF, but it kind of depends on the economy. So with COVID going on, not everybody's driving, and really those revenues have decreased significantly. And it's formula based, distributed to the state, counties, and cities and towns. Next slide. If you buy gas anywhere in the US, you are also paying federal taxes. So those taxes, again, anybody who buys the gas, it's 18.5 cents per gallon. It was last increased in 1993. So again, no increases recently, and it goes towards the Surface Transportation and Transit, so the Highway Trust Fund. And you saw some of the acronyms at the beginning of the presentation. So these funds go towards CMAQ grants that the city receives, as well as Highway Safety Improvement Program projects. It's also formula based, but there's sometimes earmarks for certain projects. So I'm going to turn it back over to Julian, and he's going to go through a few more of the funding sources.
Thank you, Shelley. So now we're going to talk about shopping, which is something I know Sky loves to do, and many others, myself included. So do you shop in Tempe? So if you shop in Tempe, you pay regular city sales tax. And who pays it? Anybody who buys stuff in Tempe. It's 1.2%. That's $1.2 or 1.2 cents for every dollar that you spend. And so this varies from city to city. So sometimes you buy something in Avondale or Phoenix or Tempe, and the tax is a little bit different. Each city sales tax varies a little bit. Are there limitations on this? No, the city can spend this money however they want. So they could choose to use this to cash fund some capital improvement projects. Also unique to Tempe is if you shop in Tempe, you also pay transit sales tax. And that's for anybody, again, who shops or buys stuff in Tempe. It's a 1/2 cent sales tax. So a 1/2 cent for each dollar spent. And that was established back in 1996. And there are limitations to that. So that can only be used for what was in that ballot language. So it's very specific on what that money can be used for. It can't be, the council can't choose to use that to fund police or fire or other non-transportation related projects. It can only be transit, and then they also include active transportation in that. So that's a lot of times we use that to fund things like bus pullouts, multi-use paths, bicycle lanes. And we are able to use that as cash funding. So instead of having to bond for these projects, we can use that cash funding to pay for these projects. And do you shop in Maricopa County? So I think most of you know that you pay a regional sales tax as well. And that's for anybody that buys things in Maricopa County. Again, it's a 1/2 cent per dollar sales tax. And most of us know this as Prop 400. And it's for surface transportation and transit. And we're actually coming up on reauthorization of that. You'll hear more about that in the upcoming months and years. But there's 3 main programs for that currently, and that could change in Prop 400 reauthorization. But currently it's the Freeway Life Cycle Program, the Arterial Life Cycle Program, and then the Transit Life Cycle Program. And there's a specific amount of that 1/2 cent sales tax that goes to those programs. And that money is administered by the Maricopa Association of Governments. So also the city of Tempe has community partners that help pay for some of our projects. And these are generally unique. It depends on the project. These could be developers, these could be businesses, these could be educational institutions. And there's a lot of leeway then on how those are set up, on how much money that is, and what that money can be used for. And just a couple examples I pulled up is we had the West 6th development in our downtown, and the neighborhood around there had concerns about traffic generated by that. And so through that development agreement, that development contributed a couple $100,000 for traffic calming in the neighborhood. Another partnership that we work closely with is with Arizona State University. If you've driven on University through campus recently, you'll notice new landscaped median islands with beautiful palm trees. That was a partnership that we had with ASU. It helped the city of Tempe and then helped to beautify the campus there. And then finally, public transportation funds contributions. When we did the streetcar, a lot of the businesses were interested in contributing and making sure that that project came to fruition. And so actually there's the businesses in the area pay money to help fund that streetcar op. So these are just a few examples of how the community can be a partner in providing funding as well. So this I pulled directly out of our budget book. This shows our 5-year CIP budget. And I just wanted to show that what we're saying is true. This is where the money comes from. And you can ignore these left 2 columns here. And this is our 2021 budget, 21-22, and so forth. The city only actually adopts the current fiscal year, and then we make modifications to outcoming years depending on funding levels and such. So you can see here on the left, top left, with transit, that the funding is development impact fees. We get our federal grants, that's generally CMAQ funding for transit. Public transportation funds, I spoke to that, that's some of our community partners. And then the bulk of our funding comes from the transit tax, you can see. Then moving on down to transportation, there's a big project going through Tempe and I-10 where the ADOT contributed money as part of that project for by our baseball stadium. We have to redo the parking lot. ASU participation, that was some money left over from that median island project. We have capital project fund balance, that's cash, you can see, not money in that one, especially in times like now, we try to hold on to cash because we can use that in a lot of different ways. Moving on down, developer assistance, development impact fees again, federal grants, so these are again CMAQ, HSIP, and others. GO bonds, look at that, that is the bulk of where we get our capital improvement funding. So again, that's the city's selling GO bonds and then paying that back with secondary property tax, as Shelley had spoke to earlier. We usually have an item for unknown grants that may come up throughout the year that we're not aware of now, but want to have that contingency in place. And then the HERF funding, and then sometimes transit tax contributes to transportation projects. So if we have an intersection project, like the one at Rural and Southern that Parsons helped us actually design, we did some work with the transit bus pullouts at that intersection and used some transit tax then to pay for those. So as I said earlier, I wish I knew all this when I first started out. I saw all these numbers and didn't know what they meant. So I think if you look at other cities at the county, you'll see similar types of funding sources in their budget books. So here's a quick quiz. I meant for this to be interactive, but using the current platform, that's not really how it works. So I'm going to read through the questions and then we'll answer them to make sure that everybody has a good, solid understanding of what Shelley and I spoke of today. So, can secondary property taxes be used to cash fund a project? That cash fund is important. Who ultimately pays development impact fees? What does VLT stand for? Who collects HERF funds? What is an example of a federal transportation grant? Who administers Prop 400 funding? Can community partners contribute to city projects? What is Tempe's largest source of transit revenue? What is Tempe's largest source of transportation revenue? And which sources are most impacted by a decline in the economy? All right, everybody lock in your vote. And here are the answers. So the first one, can secondary property taxes be used to cash fund a project? No, you can't cash fund with secondary property taxes. You can only use secondary property taxes to pay for the interest on the GO bond. So that was kind of a trick question. Who ultimately pays development impact fees? Ultimately, it comes down to the users, typically the home buyers, or if an office complex is built, the leasees of that office complex. VLT, we went over that. That's vehicle license tax. That's what you pay on your registration. Who collects HERF funds? The state of Arizona collects it, and then there's a formula to share that within the state and with cities and counties. And so probably a while back during the recession in the early 2000s or late 2000s, early 2010s, if that's what we're calling it, the city or the state actually swept a lot of the HERF funds and kept them, and which really impacted a lot of the local governments, because that's a main source of funding for transportation for most cities and towns. What is an example of federal transportation grant? There's many of them. The ones that we talked about today: CMAQ, congestion mitigation and air quality, and then Highway Safety Improvement Program, HSIP. Who administers Prop 400? MAG, Maricopa Association of Governments. Can community partners contribute? Absolutely, yes, they can. Tempe's largest source of transit revenue, we just went over that one. That's transit tax, and that's local sales tax in Tempe. What is Tempe's largest source of transportation revenue? Again, that's that GO bonds, and that was definitely the bulk of our funding for capital improvement projects. And which sources are most impacted by a decline in the economy? We're going through this right now. Gas and sales tax. So people are driving less. Gas price, the gas tax hasn't gone up since the early 90s. So that money used to go a lot farther than it does today. And then also sales tax. People are, with the economy the way it is, not spending as much money. And so we're collecting less money in taxes, which results in less money available for funding our projects. So at this point, that concludes our presentation, and Shelley and I'd be more than happy to answer any questions.
If you do have any questions, you can go ahead and enter them into the chat feature. In the meantime, I have a question. Do you see the city of Tempe redoing their 5-year CIP plan due to any COVID related effects, or going to just move forward with the 5-year plan that's already in place right now?
I can start with that. So back in June, the city council did adopt the 5-year spending authority that was established up until that point, just knowing that we really didn't have the time to make the necessary cuts. However, more recently, especially in the areas of transportation and transit, we have made some reductions in what we will be spending. And so it kind of is an ongoing plan as we learn more about what's happening with COVID, because this is, it's not the typical recession that we've dealt with in the past. And so our budget office is constantly taking in the numbers to identify whether or not we're on track. But I will say that the secondary property tax is actually quite stable, because our assessed values, right? Our homes and our properties have not really decreased in value. And so the primary source of those goes towards the general obligation bonds. So the CIP itself is fairly stable, unless, except for those projects that were identified with cash funding. So as Julian said, the city is wanting to hold on to the cash so that we're able to write out whatever economic impact we are going to be hit with in the future. So we at this point we're continuing to learn, but there shouldn't be a large impact on our CIP, except for those that are cash funded. Okay, thanks, Shelley. It's a very informative answer.
We have two questions come in. So first question, do GO bonds sunset and have to get voter approved, or are they perpetual? Start with that one.
I can try to start with that one. So the city sells the bonds and then again gets paid. Then it's paid with the secondary property tax. So the limit is really how much property tax comes in. So there's not really necessarily a sunset. Each year we determine how much funding came in from secondary property tax, and that determines then how much bonding authority and how many bonds could be sold. So it's we go through the year and figure out how much, it's after the fact. So we figure out how much bonding we need to sell for the projects that were built that year, and then pay that. So I hopefully I answered the question. I might have stumbled on that a little bit, but basically we can't, even if we want to have more projects and bond for more projects, we can only bond for what we actually bring in as secondary property tax. So that's really the limiting factor.
Thanks, Julian. All right, the second question. Are there additional funding sources for the Vision Zero type projects?
So currently, Vision Zero type projects would be eligible for more of the federal grants, especially if we see safety at an intersection for HSIP. CMAQ, it might be a little different because that's more congestion mitigation and air quality. So the 2 or 3 actually primary funding sources would be GO bonds, grants, and then in a situation where our economy is stable and we're doing well, the city could choose to take HERF funds and pay for those projects as well. So I would say those are the 3 different funding sources. Julian, can you think of anything else?
No, I think that is a good description. And a lot of times it's not all or nothing. We will take funding from multiple funding sources. So for example, we just did a project at Rural and Southern that I mentioned that just completed construction. So that's fresh in my mind, where we used some federal highway safety improvement program, HSIP money for the signal work, because we had some intersection related crashes. And we also used, I believe, some HERF funding for some of the construction, some geo bonding for some of the construction, some impact fees for some of that construction, because we also added capacity with dual left turn lanes, and then transit contributed some funding for the bus pullouts. So a lot of times it's not just one single fund. Another one I can think of is soon we're kicking off a bicycle pedestrian improvement project in North Tempe, where there will be CMAQ funding. We're adding bike lanes. There's some HSIP funding because we're putting in a Hawk pedestrian crossing, and then it's possible that there could be some HERF funding and other sources too. So sometimes we have to be creative when we have these projects, and so one thing you'll notice if you look in our Vision Zero program, it's not all projects. There's a variety of different elements to trying to get to that Vision Zero goal. So there's working with community partners and educating the public, and working with our council to look at our code and things like that. So when it comes to Vision Zero, there's definitely CIP projects associated with that, but that's not all of what it is. So but yeah, I think the short answer is we're looking at all the different opportunities to fund those types of projects.
Right, great. All right, third question came in. Were there specific names attached to the funding mechanisms / tools used to fund the community partnerships projects? If so, what are those names?
Could you read that one more time, Sky?
Yep. Were there specific names attached to the funding mechanisms / tools used to fund the community partnerships projects? If so, what are those names?
So Shelley, you might know better than I, but when I was talking about community, that item, I think that was the different businesses and developments in and around the downtown. There's a number. I don't know if we have a list of those on hand, but
Yeah, so when it came to the Median Islands and University, ASU was the contributor. I believe it just said ASU funds if you went and looked at our CIP. There's each name, I guess, is a little different depending on who is the contributor to the project. And so I'm not sure I fully understand the question, but certainly if the person who's asking the question wants to email us some additional information, we're happy to provide you or direct you to our CIP to help better answer that question.
Okay. Looks like that was the last question that's come in. So unless anybody has any other ones that they want to ask in the chat, Julie and Shelley, do you have anything else you wanted to talk about, or we will wrap up the presentation?
no, I would just like to say thank you to ACEC for putting on the conference and allowing us the opportunity to present and to help educate some of our community about how local cities like Tempe fund their projects. I apologize if there was any issues with my video or audio. I turned off my camera just to make sure that I didn't get dropped out. But thank you so much, Sky, for moderating our session, and we look forward to attending the rest of the conference.
Yes,
Shelley?
thank you. Yeah, and sorry about, I did get kicked out, so crazy times, right? All of a sudden it went away. So, but thanks everybody for attending. If you have any questions for us, feel free to email Julian and I or contact us and give us a call. Happy to chat with everyone and hope everyone enjoys the rest of the conference.
Thank you, Julian and Shelley.